Okay, so when we left off a couple of weeks ago, we just quickly reviewed a new Mishnah on the bottom of Nun Aleph.
Rabbi, can I just say something?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to personally thank you for all the effort you put in to teach this shiur. It's very well, really appreciated by everybody who attends, and even people who don't have a chance to attend. They're also thanking you for putting this together and maintaining it. And I'm really thankful for it, and I want to just thank you publicly.
Well, I thank you. I thank every member of the Shiur. And as much as you enjoy the Shiur, I enjoyed tremendously preparing and giving it. Torah is something that we all, it's in our lifeblood. And if we have the opportunity, as we've had over a number of years, to learn, albeit b'schus Rabbi Hyatt, and also just lishma. I mean, we're learning for the sake of learning. Good things come from that. So I thank you so much for the words and for everybody's commitment. Maybe we should just be zeicha to continue learning and have the schus that whatever our learning can do, as David always mentions and others in terms of the schusim for those. There's a medrash which I may have mentioned, but there's a medrash in Parshas Matos. I think I may have said it here. I heard this right before Purim from a gadol in Eretz Yisrael. He literally pointed out, of course, this controversy with the yeshiva boys going to the army, all of these issues. But that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the pasuk in Matos with regard to the Milchemes Midyan, which was a Milchemes Mitzvah. Milchemes Mitzvah says Elef Lamata. It doubles the word Elef. Elef Lamata says the Chazal, say the Mefarshim, why it's Elef Lamata? Why Elef Lamata? So the interpretation, and there are a number of interpretations, but one of the interpretations is that for every soldier who went out in the Milchemes Midyan, there was one designated soldier who learned and davened for him. It was a one-on-one. That's why it says Elef, because each Elef had an Elef. Each 1,000 had 1,000. So when we think about the Torah scholars and those who daven and those who do, you see that min haTorah, that learning lishma, learning Torah, especially in a Milchemes Mitzvah, which we are in right now, and in the darkest of times, the Torah cuts through the dark into the light. So that's our lesson. That's where we get our Masorah from. We get it from the Torah. The Torah tells us that learning Torah, even in a Milchemes Mitzvah, with a Milchemes Mitzvah, everybody's responsible to fight. That we know. But yet, Elef, the Torah tells us that learning Torah is really what gets us through the Milchama. So may we be zeicha, whatever the political winds blow, we should be zeicha, Taka. Maybe it's our Torah. Maybe it's the Torah of our neighbor. Maybe it's the Torah of someone sitting in a base medrash in Lakewood or in Yerushalayim or in Tzfat. All of this Torah collectively is what helps propel us forward. So maybe be zocha. It's been a trauma for all of us. Of course, for the Israelis, for the soldiers, for the people in the middle. But all of us, Western Jews, American Jews, UK, name it, we all feel a deep, deep pain in our heart. And may the Rebbeinu Shalom help us ease it. And our learning today, for the time that we learn, is our contribution to that. So I appreciate it, Jay, and that's Taka. All of us should be emboldened that our Torah learning really has an effect. Maybe be zeicha to great things. So we started a couple of weeks ago on Nun Aleph Omid Beis. We transitioned. Up until now, we've been learning in the recent month or two about the inyan of oinah, of price fraud. And of course, we learned about a shtus, and we learned about Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says it's more than a shtus or less than a shtus. So, but we're dealing with a chayfetz. We're dealing with an object. In other words, whatever the object was that was being bought or sold, that's where the onah issue came up. When we started 2 weeks ago, we started the Mishnah, which I want to repeat, because this transitions us into a sort of a different view of Ainah. The Mishnah here is telling us not only is there onah on things, on merchandise, on things that you buy and sell, but there's oinah on the very money that you use to buy things. That's a big chiddush. In other words, not just I'm spending $1 and I'm buying something. In those days, I don't even know if they had the paper money. They had coins. Coins can give rise to oinah, is what the Mishnah says. How? Because coins over a period of time get rubbed out. And if they get rubbed out, then in a very strict sense, they're not worth the face value of what they are. Let's just say someone had a silver dollar. Okay, it was a selah, it was a whatever it was, a dinar. Yeah. Now that silver dollar goes through iterations of buying and selling and buying and selling. Everybody touches it, everybody handles it. After a period of time, and we see it sometimes on the coins that we use, that silver dollar doesn't look like a beautiful brand new silver dollar. It's sometimes a little bit rubbed. Maybe the face is a little bit distorted slightly because it's been touched by, I don't know, 500,000 people. There, says the Mishnah, there could be oinah, because if you're relying on the fact that the coin you're using is $1 and it's not $1 because of the rubbing, the thinning, the reducing in value of that coin, then you could be over oinah. Because if it's more than a sixth, you clearly have committed a fraud. We don't think of it in those terms, but that's what this Mishnah is telling us. We have to transition from oinah on a thing that we use money to buy to the very money that we're using to buy it with. That's what this Mishnah opens up for us. We reviewed it quickly, but now we're going to get into a little bit more. You'll see how interesting and fascinating this whole discussion is on the money itself, not something we would have thought about.
Rabbi, before I'm sorry, I missed 2 weeks ago, so you may have covered this, but was it the belief at the outset that the weight of the coin was equivalent to its value, and that because it's a matter of if the printing wears down, as we have in our currency, if you can make out what it was, it has that value. In terms of trading it, it may have a different value based on, on the value of coins over time. But what I'm trying to figure out is
No, you hit on it. You hit on it. The weight has a big significance. In other words, if we traded with a silver coin and that silver coin weighed, let's say, 2 ounces, and that was the coin of the realm, 2 ounces. Okay, so you had 2 ounces of silver. You start rubbing and using and everything else. Before you know it, maybe it's 1.8. It's no longer 2 ounces. So once you start reducing the real value, i.e. the weight, because you keep handling it, then when you're trading perhaps more than a shtus. In other words, I'm giving you a coin, and I should be paying you 2 ounces worth of silver for the merchandise I'm buying, but I'm only giving you 1.7 because it doesn't have that weight anymore. That's exactly where it comes in. Now we have the potential of a shtus, and there is fraud. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, Jay.
What happens if the society accepts rubbed down silver dollars, even though they're a little bit less in weight? Don't you need the society to say that it has to be that weight? And if it's less, it definitely is worth less. But some people, we take a dollar bill, even if it's soiled or whatever it is, and we use it. So
Right, but coinage is different. Coinage, whether it's certainly the paper, but even the coins are different today than it used to be, because we're not dependent on the exact weight of the coin, in at least in the U.S. But you go back a couple hundred years ago, anywhere, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some places even today, the weight of the coin matters. And
Right.
that's why we have the ridges on the edge of the quarter, because it used to be people could shave things down, and that would show that it wasn't,
Still, if society keeps using it and they don't make a fuss over actually weighing every coin, how can there be an awe if the people accept it the way it is?
Well, okay, so yes, so that discussion will come up in terms of whether or not it's accepted for something. Okay, so you're touching on something, but we'll hold that off until we actually get to that point, because you're suggesting, not incorrectly, that okay, so it's rubbed off. What's the big deal? Everybody knows it's a coin, and I'll accept it as the coin. The teretz is not everybody accepts it as the coin, because remember, the dollar bill, for instance, and it's not the exact parallel. Why is a dollar bill of value? Because it's the full faith and credit of our monetary system that dollar bill will be worth, let's say, $1 of gold, or whatever we're talking about. So you have that belief, and then you can say, okay, now I can accept that dollar, because I know, even though it's paper, it's garnished, it's based on something solid. In those days when they had coins, and coins was the be all and end all, there was nothing else other than the trading of coins, they had to have a belief system that the coins were worth the value of what they were doing. So if someone got a coin that looked totally used up, and maybe it was only like almost a flat disc, then they had to ask themselves, am I really, I mean, what am I doing? I'm buying or selling based on a coin that doesn't even represent what the coin of the realm is. So people became sensitive to that. And once you become sensitive to that, then, it's like, sometimes we trade in a dollar bill, and I see that someone wants to give me a dollar bill and it looks like a shmata. They take it back and they give me a nice dollar bill. What do I care if the dollar bill looks like a shmata or not? It's a dollar bill. The teretz is that there is a perception that appearances count. And if I have to give you a bill, I have to give you a nicer bill, not a.
So they're really worrying about the fact that even if you accept it, when you try and buy something with that, the other person may not accept it.
That's exactly right. So it has to be something that is easily acceptable in commerce, that people won't question. Oh, what are you giving me? You're giving me something. Maybe it's fraud. Maybe because it doesn't look like a nice, bright new coin. Maybe it's fraud. Okay, these are all questions that come up in the discussion, and we're going to see it in a minute. So let's look at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah asks the following question: Kamati asela chasera. How much can a seller was the main coin of the realm? How much can a seller be missing? In other words, reduced in its content. Below tia boyono. Now, watch the words carefully, because it's very critical. How much can you reduce a seller, and it will not be oino? And it will not be. In other words, what is that threshold level where if you hit the threshold, no or no? You go below the threshold, there is oino. That's what this Mishnah is asking us, right? It's a machlokes tanoim, Rab Meir Omer Arba Isoros. It is four iser for every selah. Iser ladino. There was 2 dinorim in a selah. So basically, when you do the math and the calculations, according to Rab Meir, the amount of erosion that is not oino is 1/24 of the coin. So if you hit 1/24, according to this Mishnah, you have, that's the bare minimum that it has to be, not to drop into the category of fraud. If it's more than 1/24, now you are committing price fraud. That's Reb Meir's shita. Now you notice, we're not talking about a sixth anymore. A sixth shtus was for items, for a chayfetz. In money, it's a different story. Rabbi Yehuda says, and he uses a different monetary, which is part of the monetary system, arba pundionis. In other words, there were a punda, there was basically, in the Rashi, 4 pundos in a selah. All right, so pundion ledinor. So there was 1 punda for a dinar. So that would come out, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to be 1/12. Again, we'll do the math. It'll come to, so now his reduction is only 1/12. So he said if it's 1/12, then l'chayra from the language of the Mishnah, you're not committing fraud. If it's more than a 12, you're committing fraud. Now, who's the third Mandi Amar? Rab Shimon Omer. Rab Shimon says no. Shmoina pundios, he says 8 pundios per sela, Shnei pundios ladiner, that's 2 pundios per dinar, so it's half of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore it comes out to be 1/6, which is a shtus. So Rav Shimon makes no chilik between money and a chayfetz, between money and any object. He holds a shtus to be the line by which you can't cross. The other two Tanoim say no, it's 1/12 or 1/24. So we have a machlokes in the Mishnah about what is considered oinah and at what point you reach it. So let's take a look and see. What does Rashi tell us? Just on this. So Rashi says, Kama tieh sela chasera, okay, matbeya hayotze b'tomid hu sochek, matbeya that is in circulation and it's always being rubbed, v'choser, and so it's losing some of its physical properties because it's being rubbed. That's how Rashi interprets it. Kama techoser, how much can it be reduced? And if you keep using it, then it's oino. So to answer the question, at least Jay, at the beginning, people were makbid, that they wanted to have a coin that looked and felt and it really was a shiny new coin. So if it started, again, a little bit of rub here and there, but after a while, that coin may look totally distorted because it's been used and rubbed and who knows what. And then we'll say, you know, I don't like, it's like the old bill. I don't want to take this bill. It's dirty. It's torn. It's broken. Give me something nicer. So people then are makbid that they wanted a coin that looked like a coin. So, and Rashi now goes to explain Dalad Isorin Lasela, Isaladina, Echad Michov Dalad Bo. So according to Meir, it's 1/24th, right? The Meir Kesef Dina. Im Shnei Pundanim, Pundian Shnei Yisorin, Begamar Mafarish Maishno, de Gabi Shas Chayra Amashtus, Vakan, Yesham and Kach, Yesham and Kach. And so Rashi already is alluding to the question which we will entertain. Why is there a chilik between money and a chayfetz, whereas with a chayfetz it's strictly a 6th, and here there's a machlokes, it's a 24th, it's a 12th. Why? In other words, why is money different? We're going to hold off because the Gemara is going to explain it. Weiter, Arba Pundionim, Echet Mishnei Masar, according to Yehuda, it's 1/12. So he says 1/12 is what we're talking about, okay? And according to Rabbi Shimon, Shmoine Pundios is shtus kishar oino. It is shtus like all other oino in of a chayfetz. According to Rabbi Shimon, no chilik. So now that's the machlokes in the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah turns and asks another question, which we've been discussing all along. Ad mosai mutalahazir. How much time do you have to return it? That was a detailed discussion we had, depending whether you were the buyer or the seller. Remember, we said if you're the buyer, then you can consult and you have just a limited window. But if you're a seller, then because the sellers don't get to mix with other people for quite some time, so we said that it was somewhat open-ended, that even if they waited a long period of time and then they came back into the market and said, oh, wait a minute, this is a terrible mistake I made. I undersold it by a huge amount. So when it comes to shtus, then you can claim that amount if you're a seller but not a buyer. So now the Mishnah asks, what about for money? Ad mosel achzor, how much time do you have? So the Mishnah gives us a different timeline. Bikrochim, in the cities, in other words, in a metropolis, ad kedei she'yir l'shulchani, until you come. They used to have, well, banks, money changers. They had shulchani. A person, you know, we see this in Eretz Yisrael, we see in other places, someone sitting at a table and he's a money changer, or you go into a booth and you have a money changer. So what's the normal time that you go to a shulchani in a city? All right, I don't know if it's an hour, 6 hours a day, but there is a finite amount of time because there are money changers and you can easily go to the money changer and evaluate. Bikforim, in the small towns, in the the villages, the outlying places where they don't have money changers, or maybe only one in an entire region, ad arbe Shabbosos, until the following Erev Shabbos, because when you go shopping Erev Shabbos and you use the money, then you find out someone says to you, I'm not, don't give me that. That's not a dinar. That's not a seller. Then you find out what your coin is worth, because now you're mingling and shopping, and people typically maybe they only Shabbos, maybe they only shop Erev Shabbos from Erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos for the week. But when you go Erev Shabbos and you buy everything, so now we see a different timeline from what we know in merchandise. For chafetzim, this is not the timeline at all, but for money, this is the timeline. Now, all right, now the last part of the Mishnah, im hoya makira, if a person, let's say I had this coin and I gave it to you and I said, okay, I'm buying something with the coin, I give you the coin, and then I realize that the coin is not what it should be because it's really rubbed down, not you, the recipient, but I, the giver of the coin, im hoya makira, if I recognize that it was deficient, then I should have, in other words, it should be imposed upon me that if you come back 12 months later, a year, and say, wait a minute, you gave me a coin last year, Erev Purim, and now I'm coming back and I said, this wasn't right, and I didn't have a chance to come back to you. But if I myself was maida, oh yes, I gave you a coin that maybe was deficient, then, and now this is now on a different level. We're going to see in a second. It's not the halachic level of oinah, but it is a moral level of oinah. In other words, if I myself said, "Oh my gosh, I gave you, Jay, a coin I shouldn't have given to you, but okay, fafal," and then you come back to me and say, "You know, Tuvia, you gave me a bad coin," so then he has to accept it, but ve'ein lo elav ela taromes, there is not the halacha of oinah at that point. There is what's called taromes, and that is, I make a complaint. Taromes means I complain, but it doesn't have teeth. You can complain. You can make, you make a fuss about it, but it doesn't really have teeth whereby you can go to court, let's say to Bezdin, and collect from me. So that's why I say it's more on a moral level that, you know what, I shouldn't have done it. I'm going to make you whole. We'll make it up. So
this sounds like an interesting chiddush that people would say, oh, hold up. All of a sudden, in the middle of this legal argument, you're saying it's morally, you have a question, this and that.
Exactly
we don't
right.
normally find that in the Mishnah that they introduce.
Right. But as we have said a number of times, that especially, and we see this also, by the way, in our secular courts, but in Bezdin, there is an element of not just din, right? It's not just din, straight din, but it's also, we call it pshara, but it's not pshara here. It's not settling anything. It's the feeling that you got to do what's right. And sometimes there are legal constraints which don't necessarily say you have to do it exactly right, but it's a moral equivalent. And we are moral people. I mean, the Jewish people are, our Torah's Messinai was also done with compassion, with morality. So we should pass that morality on between Adon L'Chavero. We should say, you know what? Chatasi, I recognize I didn't do totally right by you. I may not have a legal obligation, but I feel bad. Let me make it up to you. That's an expression. We'll make it up to you. What? It's a chiddush. It's a chiddush, right? And by the way, it's a chiddush for the rest of the world from the Bnei Yisrael. That chiddush came from us, is because we didn't live strictly by din. And here you have an example that among the Chazal, they're saying you did something wrong, but we can't punish you. But you have taromis. And if you have taromis, a person shouldn't feel, oh, I can walk around with my head up held high, so you complained against me. You shouldn't, you should avoid a complaint. If someone comes back and says, I have a taina on you, then you shouldn't just turn a blind eye and say, tough luck. I mean, you should listen to the taina, and maybe there's a way to make it up. Not minadin, but again, you can somehow make it up. So he says, "Ve'lo alav ela tarumis." He can make a complaint, but nothing else. Okay, now the end of the Mishnah again amplifies what we just said. So we know by Masa Sheni, if you have a field and you're Chutz Yerushalayim, and you want to go up to Yerushalayim in the years, the second and fifth year where you have to do Masa Sheni, you can't bring the produce because it'll spoil. So what do? You sell it and you take the money and you go to Yerushalayim and you buy the equivalent. What happens if the money that you got for selling of the Maser Sheni was this kind of money that was rubbed out, and you were going to have, let's say, 5 sloim for the produce, and then go to Yerushalayim. Turns out you don't have 5 sloim because it was rubbed out. Maybe you have 4, 4.5. So says the Mishnah, you can accept it from Maser Sheni, and you don't have to be choishish, you don't have to worry. Why? She'ena ela nefesh ra, because only a person of ill will, a person who is, the person who isn't a righteous, straight person, will say, sorry, you don't have enough for the Maser Sheni because your coin is not quite up to snuff. In other words, what you see from this is, and this is the morality factor, Jay, that comes in here, is that among us, we shouldn't be makbid. Yes, we can be, because we're talking about a halacha. This whole Mishnah is a halacha. So, but nevertheless, when it comes to, in this case, Maser Sheni, it's a big mitzvah. You would think that for Maser Sheni, you should do everything kechut hasara, exactly, down the line without any deviation. Says the Mishnah, no, it's not that way. Even in Maser Sheni, you have to turn an eye and say, okay, so it's not 100% worth the same dollar of the produce that I gave you. But nevertheless, if I go to Yerushalayim and I go to Machne Yehuda, and I want to buy the produce, the same produce that I got the money for, don't be makbid. Okay, so it's not 100% to the coin. It's 80%, 85%. So don't be makbid. So we see not only from this Mishnah that we have different halachas on what is shtus, but we see here a different approach than we've seen by merchandise. Remember, we had the machlokes between the halacha and the Mishnah. If you have more than a shtus, if you have exactly a shtus, can you undo the entire deal or just get the shtus back? All legal. It's an all legal approach. Here, it's extra legal. It's not just legal, it's also moral, it's also ethical. So there is a different approach to the merchandise vis-a-vis the coin. And part of the kasha that when Rashi was asking before, and we're going to see, is why these differences? Why is there a difference between a shtus for an item and a shtus for the money that you're using to buy the item? That's really sort of the global question that we're going to ask here, but that's what we're talking about. All right, so Rashi said, okay, good. So, B'krachim, and Rashi says, Yesh Sham Shulchani, Akidesh Yira Shulchani. So, if in a big city, you go to since there is a Shulchani, then until you go to the Shulchani, you're allowed to retract. B'kforam She'em Bam Shulchani, Ad Arbi Shabbosas, Sheba, the future, Lahotzi Be'erev Shabbos, L'Suda Shabbos, since he's going to go buy for Shuda Shabbos, or Yodaim Yochel, Lahotzi V'kiblu Mimenu. So that's the time when people go shopping, at least once a week, Erev Shabbos. Therefore, for that, you were allowed to wait for that period of time. V'im hoya hanoisen mechira, and if someone the noisen was makira, he was makir, recognized that what he did was he gave him an insufficient coin. So right away, Rashi says, you just got through saying that in a small village where there isn't access, you wait till the following Shabbos. Then why is this worse than a small town? In a small town, you're given, let's say, the full week. Why do you give it a year? At least you know that next Shabbos you're going to go and buy stuff, right? I mean, he's saying that that is the pattern, that Erev Shabbos people go shopping. So they're going to go shopping no matter what. So just because I recognize that I give you a bad coin, it's still only a Shabbos away before the fellow is going to use it. And if he uses it, he'll realize that it's insufficient. Why do you give him a year? That's what Rashi's asking. You just got through saying in the worst case, it's a week till next Shabbos. Then why do you give him a year just because I recognize I gave you a bad coin? All right, that's kasha from Rashi. But says Rashi, ve'en lo olav ela tarumis mefarish b'gemara. So the Gemara is going to explain why it's only tarumis and not a more deeper halachic issue. V'noisna b'chilul Maser Sheni, when you deconsecrate, when you take Maser Sheni and make it chol, b'gemara mefarish, and the Gemara is going to ask in Beshava, in Besela, Yofe. In other words, is what you're using the value of the currency or at its highest value? Meaning that, let's say I exchanged my Maser Sheni for 5 sloim, and now the sloim that I got are really only, let's say, 4.5. So Rashi says the Gemara is going to ask, when it says that you should not be unduly difficult to take in Maser Sheni, do you mean when he goes to Machane Yehuda and the guy is going to give him, should he give him what the face value is, which is 4.5 because it got reduced, or Besela Yofe, what it was originally? In other words, don't be makbid, but you can reduce it the amount that it has been sort of defaced or not. So Rashi is clearing that when we say she'ena ela nefesh ra, that it's ill will not to accept the money, Rashi is clearing, what does it mean to accept the money? Sure, you can accept the money at face value, but you can also say, no, I'm happy to take your money, but I'll take it for what it's worth in the marketplace, which is only 4.5 sloim because it's been rubbed out. That's what Rashi is saying, when you should not have a bad heart. Do you have a bad heart, an ill will, if you don't take full value? That's Rashi's kasha. In other words, you want to be a good guy, and you want to say, of course, I'm going to sell you for Maser Sheni, but let me sell you what it's worth, shaveh, not sell a yofe, meaning in its original value. The fisheina midazu shel posle matbeya b'shvil chesaron ma'at el nefesh ra. In other words, a person who will passel the matbeya because it is less than its value is a bad heart. So Rashi is raising an interesting question. In other words, if I go to Machane Yehuda coming from, let's say, Chutz Yerushalayim, and I'm going to buy 5 sloim worth of, because that's what I paid, 5 sloim, Rashi is saying that, you know what, it may not be a ruach ra, a bad heart, for someone to say, okay, it's worth 4.5, I'll give you 4.5, as opposed to, I don't want to take this money at all because it's bad money. So not to take bad money, that's definitely a ruach ra. That's a bad guy. But to take 4.5 instead of 5 might not be a bad guy. He's taking what the market dictates. Or no, it was 5 seller to begin with. That's called seller yofe. It was seller yofe. Take the seller yofe because he's doing a mitzvah of Maser Sheni. That's what Rashi is clearing here. Which is it? And he said that the Gemara will amplify further what we mean by ruach ra. What is he allowed to do? What is he not allowed to do? Okay, that's the issue.
The thing that bothers me about this, unless I miss this part somewhere, we've got 2 parts of the Maser Sheni. First is when you initially trade the food that you have, the produce that you have, for money, and then you take that, and there you're sort of on your own honor and so on, so all this issue comes up. Right. Then you go to Yerushalayim, and you're using that money to buy stuff.
To replace the Maser Sheni, right.
To replace the Maser Sheni. But the thing is this, the people in Yerushalayim, they're there, this is how they're making a living. And they're farmers from other places, and they're selling their stuff or whatever. And so for them to say, "Oh, I'm gonna lose 10% on every deal because everybody's coming in with messed up money," it's just that's really hurting them.
So the chiddush here, you're right, Nasha. But the chiddush here is you're going to the storekeeper and you're saying, "Rabbi Yitzchak, I'm here from, I don't know, Akko. I'm here from Tiberia, wherever." And I'm I'm bringing my Maser Sheni. You tell him, I'm bringing my Maser Sheni. I'm doing a mitzvah. It's not just buying and selling. It's l'shem mitzvah. Says the Mishnah that you, the storekeeper, once you hear that it's l'shem mitzvah, you shouldn't have a ruach ra. Whereas you might have a ruach ra with Jay, who came to just buy food in the normal course. But I'm coming l'shem mitzvah. So the Shem Mitzvah, you should have a different mindset for me as you have for Jay, because Jay is Mekach and Memker, and that's regular business. I'm not regular business. I'm here to do a mitzvah. Now, the fact that my coin isn't 100% up to snuff, you should look away because you're helping to participate in the mitzvah of Maser Sheni. That's what we're talking about. So it's slightly different.
But
You're
the
right.
vendors in Yerushalayim,
Yeah.
especially around time of Ola Regel, on the one hand, that's their big time and they can make a lot of money. On the other hand, though, you would
They
think
should be
most of the
sensitive.
people coming in, well, they should be sensitive, but on the other hand, most of the people coming in, they're bringing their Meiser Sheni, and so on. And so it's, or you could argue, they're coming in to do mitzvahs. Everybody's coming in to do
But
mitzvahs.
they also, the
So I think the
storekeeper,
point is that once you are in the realm of l'shem mitzvah, then you should put on your mitzvah hat, and you should think differently than if you were just a regular Monday in the middle of Teves where you were buying and selling. Then you could say, "Oh, wait a minute, okay, this, that. I'm a businessman." But the Mishnah is telling us that you should be more generous when it comes to Masa Sheni and not be as makbid as you would otherwise. It's exactly the point. That
but
in
he's
other words,
also part of the mitzvah. The
it's
store
part of the mitzvah. You are
He's
part of the
getting a
mitzvah.
mitzvah.
Exactly.
But he's
Yeah.
also getting a mitzvah for accepting it that way.
That's correct.
Treating
In
it
other
like
words,
a mitzvah.
and that's the chiddush. That's an interesting chiddush, that you, the seller of the Masa Sheni, to the person who's making oil regel, would get some kind of schar for being part of the chain of Masa Sheni. Now, it's not your Masa Sheni, but this is the chiddush of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is, and they said it in so many words, she'ena ela nefesh ra, it's only someone of ill will who won't accept the coin of Masa Sheni, whereas you might not accept it in regular Mekach and Memker, but when it comes to Masa Sheni, you should accept it, because otherwise there's a certain ingratitude that you're not allowing someone who make the trip and is Isaac b'mitzvah, somehow you're going to participate in that mitzvah. We don't know exactly how, but you're going to participate in the mitzvah. That's the chiddush of why this is different than a regular, I walk into the store with a coin that's rubbed out, and you say to me, "Sorry, guys, I mean, I would love to take it, but it's not worth what I'm selling you. You have to make it up to me." Here, the Mishnah is B'dafka telling us, don't press him to make it up to him, because it's ruach ra, it's a nefesh ra, it's a sort of a heart. Yeah, okay.
This also opens up a door that says, in regular commerce, and somebody comes into the store and says, "Look, I need to buy a new tallis, and I have this rubbed out coin." Then in regular business, you could also say that the storekeeper should accept the coin that's not perfect, because he's going to be part of a mitzvah of tallis and davening, etc., etc. So does it work backwards into the regular commerce?
Well, but that's a very interesting point. In other words, if what you are transacting is somehow l'shem mitzvah, and it isn't
Right.
normal, objective, I'm buying this, I'm buying that, I'm coming l'shem mitzvah. Here, B'dafka, the Mishnah talks about Masa Sheni, but you're raising a question. What happens if I have to buy a pair of tefillin? And what I have is, okay, it's a big mitzvah to buy a pair of tefillin. So I have a coin that isn't quite, the full value of what you might expect. What do you, as the seller of the tefillin, what obligation do you have to sort of give me some leeway to buy tefillin?
Right.
I would argue that certainly if you're Chabad, but even if you're not Chabad, everybody wants to be mezakeh someone else to do a mitzvah, unless you are a complete,
Right. But I would argue,
Piloni, that you have no
right.
relationship to the mitzvah.
I would argue, though, that the Meiser Sheni is a special thing, because the very essence of it is that you literally, in order to be able to do
Right.
the mitzvah from coming all the way from the Negev or whatever,
Yeah.
far away,
Yeah.
you had to go ahead and exchange
No,
it for money.
I agree with you 100%,
Right.
that Masa Sheni is picked for a reason, because Masa Sheni has a different character. I'm just extending it a little bit to the question that Jay is asking. What
Right.
about
So in a way, and I know we talked about it, I don't remember what the result was, but in a certain sense, it's not kedusha, like this money isn't kedusha like hekdesh, but there is some special status to this money from Meiser Sheni, and so whereas you take some money out of your bank account or from when you sold stuff or whatever to then go buy talis or tefillin or lulav or whatever, that money doesn't have, other than in your mind that you've said, oh, you know what, I'm going to set this aside for this, but it doesn't have a status the way the money from Meiser Sheni has a status.
Why not?
Right. No,
No, because literally the action of exchanging it for the Meiser Sheni initially, redeeming the
exchange, the exchange, actually, you're in the middle of it, because it started back in the
you
village.
did stage one.
started back in the beginning, right.
So it's you're halfway through the full mitzvah when it comes to Marsa Sheni.
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
but
Buying a
that
pair
which
of
means it's
tefillin,
right,
it's a brand new mitzvah. You're not in the middle of anything.
right.
So this is
exactly.
an interesting question. I will take a look further to see if there's a further discussion on taking this mitzvah of Masa Sheni and extending it to other mitzvahs where you're buying the same mitzvah. Because you're right, Masa Sheni is a different mitzvah, let's say, than buying a pair of tefillin, because you're part of this whole cycle of exchange.
Well,
So it's a good question. We have to take a look further to
It's a
see.
two-part mitzvah.
The words nefesh ra may not apply to someone who's selling you a pair of tefillin, but yet it's not the right thing to do. In other words, again, we're talking about this moral code. What's my achrayus?
Yeah.
If you're not going to be able to buy a pair of tefillin, should I feel guilty because I'm not selling the tefillin? You need to wear tefillin, and I'm holding you back from tefillin because I'm not accepting your deficient money. So we get into all kinds of questions here about what's the right thing to do, not the legal thing to do, but what's the right thing to
But
do.
Marsa Sheni is a two-part mitzvah.
It is.
Everything else is a single mitzvah.
Exactly right. It's a different, it's
It's a
not a
big
parallel.
difference.
I'm not making it a parallel, but it's an interesting
Big
question.
difference between a two-part mitzvah,
But right,
because it's two
Exactly.
separate people on both ends
right,
compared to, so
exactly.
something
Okay,
to look into anyway.
yeah, all
But-
right. So
but
now we've
morally,
established,
I think morally it's very easy to extend it to regular purchasing things for mitzvahs.
yes.
You
yes.
buy a lulav and esrig and this and that.
Well, and
You're
any
around when
mitzvah,
buying.
you're 100% right. Any mitzvah can be the subject of the same discussion. The question is it singling out Masa Sheni for the reasons that we're talking about because it's two-part, you start here, you go there, you can't do it? Or does something leak out of this mitzvah to tell us that other mitzvahs also you shouldn't be makvid? Good question. I have to take a closer look and understand what the Mefarshim say and again where we stand. So now, summarizing, we see that there's a chiluk between oinah for chayfetz, oinah for money, and then the ancillary questions about how and where and when also fall out different. How much time you have, where you go, what you do. We clearly see a demarcation, and that's the underlying question when the Rashi posed before. Why? Why should there be a chilik between money and a chayfetz? I know as I know, right? I know as I know. It's fraud. Why are we making a distinction? So
Can
now
I
let's
just-
get into the Gemara, and we're going to
Can I
see.
just
Yeah,
ask-
Jay.
Can I just get one question? We have the two categories already. Is there a third category when it comes to services? That somebody is being hired to do services and they don't do 100% of the thing. Does the same question start to show up?
So give me a for instance.
You hire somebody to paint your house, and it turns out that it's $100 to paint the room, and he doesn't do a perfect job. Is he in fact in this? Does it start opening up another category called services?
Okay, okay, but you're now going into a different direction. You're saying he didn't do a good job, so therefore I'm not mechuyev to pay him the full
Totally.
amount.
Yeah.
So, but why would that be? So that should be no
Because he was agreed to $100 and he didn't do $100 worth of work.
Okay, that would not be in this realm. I mean, that's maybe a separate issue that we have to see if the Gemara is going to address. But now you're talking about if you don't complete the job, then why should I pay you? Why should it be no if I don't pay you the full amount of what you should be getting because you didn't comply? You didn't give me the full service. I think that's another parsha. I don't think that's. Yeah, that's another parsha, Jay, which again we can look at and see if the Gemara. I haven't seen it, but it could be that maybe the Gemara later will discuss services as well. But right now we're only focused on merchandise or the coin in terms of the actual transaction. So now, remember what I said at the beginning. Just look at the first words of the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Let's read it. Kama tiasela chasera. How much should the selah be missing below year boy or no? And it's not fraud. Right? Now, Frek the Gemara, let's go to the Gemara. V'raminu, I'm going to ask you a kasha on this Mishnah. We have a brisa, a separate brisa that says as follows. what does the Brisa say? Ad kama tia sela chasera, same words. How much is the sela should be missing? V'yia bayana, and it will be oina. Do you see what the Brisa says? The Brisa takes the same words, kama sela chasera, but instead of saying what the Mishnah says, v'lo yiano, and there won't be oina, the Brisa says, and there will be oina. So there is a Brisa that is looking at this question from a different perspective. So the kasha is v'raminu. You tell me in the Mishnah that this discussion. What do we have a discussion? Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon each gave a number: 1/24th, 1/12th, 1/6, and in answer to what question? Below year by oino. In other words, if it's 1/12th to 1/24th, it's not oino. Because that's what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is asking how much can it be missing, and it's not oino. So Reb Meir says 1/24th, and Reb Yehuda says 1/12th. Now the Brisa is saying it differently. The Brisa says Atkamatias sela chasera v'ir boyano. Says Reb Meir 1/24th. Says Reb Yehuda 1/12th. So Reb Yehuda Shimon says 1/6. That's a stira. That's a direct question. What? That's a direct contradiction.
But it's the same question.
It's the same question, and the answer is different. In the Mishnah, the answer is that 1/24th is okay, and in the Brisa, 1/24th is not okay. Because by using the same 1/24th, 1/12th standard, the Brisa is saying, how much can it be reduced? And it is oina, says Reb Meir 1/24th. But Reb Meir in the Mishnah said 1/24th is still okay.
Either coming down to the question or coming up to the question.
Okay, so you that's the answer. You're mechavan to the answer. In other words,
I didn't look ahead.
No. But my point is, face value. This looks. How do you reconcile? You're right. But face value, if I tell you that Reb Meir says 1/24th is not oino according to the Mishnah, and according to the Brisa 1/24th is oino, what do we do? That's so the Gemara's kasha is it's a stira from the Mishnah to the Brisa. Now you're right. We're going to go, but you understand the question. The question is the same verbiage and the same machlokes between Reb Shimon and Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda exists whether you say it is oino, if it's missing, or not oino, and that can't be. You can't have it both ways.
It's a perfect stira.
That's the kasha.
It's the perfect stira that can be asked about any question.
No, right. So we asked the question to get the answer, but you're right. So the initial question is, if the Mishnah says that Reb Meir says that 1/24th is not oino, okay, I'm good. But the Brisa says, what is oino? 1/24th. So if it's exactly 1/24th, what is it? Is it oino? Is it not oino? That seems to be a machlokes between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Now you're right. Omer Rav Papa. Let's get right to the answer. Rav Papa says, lo kasha. It's not a kasha for the reason that you just said, which we're going to explain why. What's the teretz? Tana didon in our Mishnah kochoshev mimata lamala. We're going from the least amount of erosion of rubbing lamala to the most amount. So we say that going from bottom to up, we reach 1/24th. But 1/24th according to Meir is already oino. But it's oino because we're going from the bottom to the top. So when you read the Mishnah that says v'lo tiyeh oino, we have to read it with an understanding that we're starting from a lower amount, and when we get to 1/24th, it's oino. However, Tana Bora, the Tana of the Brisa, kochoshev mil mala lamata. You're right. He goes from top down. So he's starting from what is oino. Okay, once you get to 1/24th, it's already oino. But then we go down to lower levels, right? And when there's decreasing levels, then we have to analyze whether or not there's oino or not. So the point is that there is no kasha because it depends on your perspective. But bottom line, everybody agrees that when Reb Meir says 1/24th, or Rabbi Yehuda says 1/12th, or Reb Shimon says 1/6, that is oinah. The number that is in the Mishnah or in the Brisa is oinah. Question is, how do you get there? Do you get there by saying that's the high watermark and we go down? Or do we still know there's a low watermark and this is the high watermark? But everybody in the Mishnah and the Brisa, all the Tanoim of the time agreed that when Reb Meir says 1/24th, he meant 1/24th is oinah. Or Rabbi Yehuda says 1/12th, or Reb Shimon 1/6. That is oinah. And we know from our previous discussions that that's correct. That when you get to 1/6, that's oinah. It's not that 1/6 is not, and if you go over 1/6, there the machlokes is if you go over 1/6, can you undo the entire deal? But 1/6 is clearly shtus, right? So that's the answer. You're right, Jay. That's the answer. It depends. It's not a kasha because it depends on your perspective.
So
Okay.
they're still arguing on the exact number when you hit the 1/24th or
Yeah, we're still arguing
what
on the number.
happens at
Correct.
at the 0 point of that number.
Correct.
We've
Okay.
had that question before. Didn't we discuss this in terms of hitting the exact number?
Yes, and we said that if you hit the exact number, right? Then depending on whether you paskin like the Mishnah or like the halacha, remember, because that Mishnah was an anomaly,
Right.
whether or not exact number you can undo the deal, or the halacha you can only get your differential but not undo the deal. Right. But that was a different machlokes. That's not
Why isn't that related to this same question?
because Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda don't discuss that issue. In other words, that was an issue that was discussed with Reb Shimon, and we're going to see why in a minute. Because Reb Meir and Yehuda don't go there. Okay, so now that we understand that there's no machlokes, now let's get to the bigger question, the question that we asked at the very beginning. My shno b'sela de pligi. Why by sela do we say what is the critical number between Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon? Umay shno b'talis deloy pligi. And by a talis, meaning by merchandise, there's no machlokes. Everybody says a 6, right? Did we have any machlokes other than Reb Tarfon and that in a particular place in Lud? But other than that, was there a machlokes that we missed? That by shtus for a chayfetz, for a talis, there is a machlokes? There's no machlokes. Why is there a machlokes here by money and there's no machlokes by merchandise? That's the Gemara's kasha. On Rava, the Rava says, no, there really isn't the machlokes. Here's why. Mantana talis. So there's two answers to this question. There's Rava's answer, who says, who is the Tana who says that a talis there is oinah, Rab Shimon he. So let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah that we had that talked about the previous Mishnah, right? Talked about what was the previous Mishnah? Talked about a talis, and there was no Manda Omer. There was no Manda Omer. Who is the Manda Omer of that Mishnah? Says the Gemara, that was Rab Shimon. So Rab Shimon said that shtus is 1/6. That's what it is. But Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda argued on Rab Shimon. The Mishnah didn't tell us that. But according to Rava, the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Meir exists even by a chayfetz. But since it was a Stam Mishnah, and Stam Mishnah, that case was not Rab Meir, it was Rab Shimon, we said Rab Shimon is the one who says that it's a shtus. But truthfully, Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda argue on Rab Shimon. So in other words, according to Rava, the way he backs into this, he says, you know why there really isn't a chiluk. You're telling me why is there a chiluk? The answer is there is no chiluk. Rab Meir, Rabbi Yehuda say 1/24th and 1/12th by chayfetz and by kesef. Except since the Manda Omer of the Mishnah was Rab Shimon, we only addressed Rab Shimon because that was the halacha. But Rab Meir Yehuda didn't agree. So now when Rab Meir Yehuda in our Mishnah is saying that by money it's 1/24th, 1/12th, they're l'shitosam. They're not saying anything different than they said before. So that's how Rava wants to interpret it. It's kind of a little bit of a hard sell because l'chayra back in Chayfetz, Why didn't Rav Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, why didn't the Mishnah? Remember, the Tanaim is sitting around and they want to express everybody's view. So there was Rav Shimon had a view, Rav Meir had a view, Rabbi Yehuda had a view. All the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah said was, when it comes to Chayfetz, then it's a shtus. Who is the Manda Omer? It doesn't tell us, but it's Rav Shimon. Why didn't the Mishnah say right there? But Rav Meir says it's 124th, Rabbi Yehuda says it's 112th. Why didn't the Mishnah say it?
Right.
So it's a little bit difficult to accept Rava's interpretation, because why didn't it say it? All of a sudden it says it in this Mishnah, but not in the previous Mishnah.
You
So
know,
comes Abaya and gives a slightly better answer.
you know, they were not quiet sitting around the table there.
That's right.
Even though they're not mentioned in the Mishnah, they certainly were not quiet.
They certainly weren't quiet, right? So the Mishnah could have codified and said Rav Meir's view and Rabbi Yehuda's view, and it did not. We're imputing those views to a talis, to a chayfetz. It's a little forced. I mean, again, that's the way you have to answer it according to Rava. Says Abaya different. Abaya Omar. There is a difference. Listen, very interesting. There's a difference between money and a chayfetz. What's the difference? Talis ad shtus mochel inish. By a talis, he means a chayfetz. Okay, so here talis is in the larger segment means a garment. Okay, a garment. So if you have shtus by a garment, says the Gemara, you can go up to a 6. Why? The omre inche, because it's common knowledge. People will say, ashik legabof, you can pay extra. In other words, be extravagant for gaboch, your back, meaning the clothes that you wear. But when it comes to food that you eat, you shouldn't be overly generous. What does this Gemara mean? The Gemara means that when it comes to a chayfetz, now he's excluding food from the situation, but when it comes to buying a chayfetz, and here he refers to garments, okay, I'm meichel if I'm paying up to a shtus because I need a good garment to keep me warm in the winter, and I want to look nice, etc., etc. So in contrast to food, which, okay, food is plentiful. I'm not going to overpay. I'm not going to go to the store and pay a shtus because I'm buying food, says the Gemara. But I will, in the mindset of a person, I will pay a little bit more for a nice garment. So the Gemara is telling us, when it comes to a chayfetz, shtus isn't such a big deal. I'll pay a little bit more, not for food, but for a garment. But sela, but when it comes to a coin, kiven de lo sagile, since a coin, okay, if it's not such a good coin, I'm not going to use it. In other words, a coin doesn't have the same cheshivas to a person as an item of clothing that he wears. So since a sela, an item of money, is the lo sagile, it doesn't have the same, say, equivalent value as clothes, loy machel. Then if it deteriorates, a person is not going to be meichel. In other words, people, let's say people have their own quirks. Clothes, yeah, I'll spend a little bit more because I want to keep warm, it looks nice, etc. Food, no way. A sela, a coin, why should I give leeway to a coin? Give me a different coin. In other words, the coin, you can't equate the coin to the chayfetz, to the garment. So therefore, Abaya is telling us that this whole thing is a mindset in a person's mind. What's more chashuv? And he comes to the conclusion, says Abaya, that a chayfetz is more chashuv. Therefore, a person will allow a little bit of a leeway up to a shtus, whereas for other things like sela, even food, but even a sela, a coin, we're not going to be so generous. Again, you can say, where does he get this from? What's his cheshbon? But Abaya, maybe they took a poll. I don't know. And people aren't makbid when it comes to clothing. I'll pay a little bit more. I want to look nice. I need it, whatever. But when it comes to other things, I'm not so I am makbid. I don't want to overpay for a thing, and if a coin doesn't is devalued, why should I give the guy a break? I shouldn't give him a break. So again, both Rava and Abaya are sort of pressing a little bit, I think, to answer the question, what's the difference between a coin and a chayfetz? And you can take your pick. You can say that Rava is really forcing the issue. Abaya may not be forcing the issue. But I think, generally speaking, this is kind of the way the Tanoim looked at it. And therefore, they made and then the interpretation of what they were saying is that either Reb Shimon, when it came to a chayfetz, had his view, and Reb Meir and Yehuda had theirs, but it wasn't announced, and therefore there's no machlokes between money and chayfetz because they all took the same position. Or you can argue that there really is a difference between a chayfetz and a seller. For a chayfetz, a person's mindset is, I'll spend a little bit more, even if it's overpriced. I don't mind. But when it comes to money, why should I give you the break? Again, there's clearly is a psychological factor here that we have to take into account. Okay, go ahead, Michael. I think you were.
They have a lot of experience at Tanoim with people. When they came to this sort of analysis that says this is what the mindset is for this, that, or the other, they're not just guessing at it. They had living experience. Shilas and Shuvas were always being asked of them. So they had some feel for how people behave.
Yeah.
No, Michael keeps
exactly.
I don't agree.
Michael, take the floor. I'll be quiet.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. You're disturbed by this.
So I'm very disturbed by this because if I have a coin or a dollar bill, and I know we're talking coins, but let's just talk a coin that's defaced. If I have the coin, my goal is to get the full return for that because I'm going to spend that first. That's going to be my biggest worry is the fact that I may not get full value. I paid full value to get that coin and I gave full value to get that coin. And if I don't get it in return, then I've lost money. So the biggest focus that I'm going to have is on making sure that I maximize my value to get in return what I have because and this subjectivity about, well, if it's this versus that, as a general rule of human nature, everybody's different in terms of what matters. But I dare say that the Talmud goes into great lengths to protect people against loss.
Yes.
We're focused everything. We move mountains for loss. We make exceptions because of loss. And if this is going to give me a loss, it's going to be foremost in my mind because that's what we focus on. So this other, belief is a contrarian belief to what human nature is most likely to do or what we set up. So I don't understand how they rule this way in opposition to what everything else in the Gemara is focused on.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Michael. In other words, and you're right, we have seen many, many times where the Gemara points out that Chazal are very makbid on a person's economic condition, not to lose money, and this, that, and the other. 100% correct. So given that that is the mindset, then why? So you're asking why would, in other words, so the.
How
So
could they
I think the
divert
approach
that from
yeah, I
being
think
primary?
Yeah, go ahead.
All I said was, how can they divert that from being primary? To say that they're worried more, Chayfetz, they want to, they're willing to buy clothes because they want to look better. The most important thing that we all focus on is maintaining and increasing value. And we're worried about not taking advantage of the other person.
Right.
So in this case, unless there's, a rule that's established, my concern is that I'm devalued from what I was before. So help me standardize what that value is. And so now you're going to say it's subjective. And so therefore, this is not as important. I don't believe 9 out of 10 of us would not be more concerned about that than the.
Okay. So I think when it comes to a person's economic condition, you are 100% right that Chazal is very makbid, and therefore by a coin, we take the position that we have to protect the individual, consistent with everything that we have learned before. And by protecting the individual, we do not allow shtus, we don't allow any kind of fraud on the money aspect, on the coin. We have to be, strictly speaking, as makbid, that the coin has value, etc., etc. The chiddush, I think, comes in on the chayfetz, because you're saying that, well, but we see that everybody, the protection of the individual is always paramount of his economic value. And the answer still is yes, that it is paramount. But, here's the but, says Abaya, and again, maybe that was the feeling at the time. Maybe now, looking back, maybe it's different for us. But let's just say that a bias chiddush, which we accept, is that the exception to the rule of protecting the individual, his economic integrity, is a little bit loose or lax when it comes to a person's, here we're talking about a garment, because a person says, for that particular item, not when I'm going to go buy something stam in the marketplace, but we're talking about a chayfetz, where it's something, and he uses the words ashik legaboch, the value of what you have on your back, your clothing. That, says Abaya, again, maybe took a poll, most people will not be as makbid economically. Yes, I'll pay a little bit more. And again, we can argue and say why, but clearly in Abaya's opinion, that is a fact. Now we're looking back and saying, would we do that today? If you go into a store and you want to buy a nice suit, and the marketplace dictates that this suit should be $300, and then you look at it, the markup is, well, it's 350 or 3.25, whatever it is, and you say, no, I'm not paying it. But then you look at it, you put it on, it fits so nice, it looks good, you have hana. In other words, we're playing on your feelings, that this is something you'd pay a little bit more for to look good, or it's wool as opposed to a lesser quality fabric, so it's a little bit warmer in the winter or lighter in the summer, whatever the case may be. I think, Michael, that's the way we have to, again, maybe it's not a complete fit, just like Rava's fit was a little bit strained. Abaya's fit may not be 100% what is consistent with what you're talking about. That
Maybe Chazal didn't have the Lower East Side.
Right. There you go. So, but again, in principle, we're not going to be able to give a specific answer to the concern. I understand, but in principle, Abaya is telling us that the mindset of people, and again, that may have been at the time in place, the mindset of people, because he makes the comment that when it comes to a person's clothes, the Amre Inchi, a person says, in other words, it was said, Amre Inchi, it was said in the marketplace, Ashik legaboch, v'shaveh lekriseh. I'll pay for the garment, so to speak, but I won't pay for the food. So they had a different perception on food, that for food, even though you need food, you need to live on food, but I'm not going to overpay. So hence the especially in Eretz Yisrael, but in many other countries, there was price fixing on food that certainly at one point, I remember in Eretz Yisrael, in the early days when I used to visit or spend time there, that certain staples were government controlled, and there was it wasn't an open marketplace. I think it was bread, maybe rice, potatoes. I don't remember all the detail, but why? Because that's something that a person needs to live, so they control that. And people are going to be makbid not to pay even a nickel more for that item. But again, an item of chayfetz, a clothing, that's something that, it's an exterior thing. What do we always say? That if you wore a fur coat and you really wanted to stay warm, you should have the fur on the inside, not on the outside. But you have it on the outside because it wanted to look good, so that other people see that you're wearing something that looks very nice and extravagant. that's a mindset. And I think what Abaye is saying is that's the way people think, that when it comes to a beautiful item of clothing, I'll pay a little bit more. It's not such a big deal. Again, we can argue that, Michael, and I'm not going to say that there isn't another view on that, but essentially those are the two answers the Gemara wants to give to the underlying question of the chiluk between the whole monetary discussion and the discussion about a chayfetz. Okay, so we're going to stop here. And so in other words, there's a lot more to go in terms of understanding this situation, but we see from what we've learned that we have two tracks on the whole question of Eino, and there may be others, as you asked about service and other things, we'll see, but you have a chayfet, you have a track that has to do strictly with items that you purchase, and you have a track of the actual money that you're using to make the purchase, that there was a whole halachic discussion about whether or not there was Eino in all of that. Maybe something we wouldn't have thought about, because money is money. What's the difference if I give you a dirty bill or a clean bill, or if I give you a worn out quarter or a nice quarter? I mean, we might not have thought that is a big deal. Says the Gemara, it is a big deal, and people were makbid on that. Today, in our time, if this happened, I don't think, I mean, to me, does anybody makbid if you get a rubbed out Roosevelt dime or a regular dime or a quarter that looks for for shlachet? Who cares? I know it's a quarter. I use it. The seller sells me the stuff for the quarter. I use the quarter. Somehow it doesn't resonate with us that this is such a big deal. But apparently, in the time of the Gemara, that was something that people were makbid on. So again, we're going back to a time, and that's why, Michael, we can ask these questions, but maybe the mindset of people, the way Abaye is describing it, was a different mindset than we have today. So maybe it's hard to replace our thinking with their thinking. Again, I'm just venturing a thought here. But all right, so Mitchell, next week we're going to pick up on this whole discussion, and it is a fascinating discussion, and we'll continue on.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yashkar.
Yeah. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week. Sei gesund.